I have with me Sarah Garrett. We're both from the SCDE, and we're here to talk to you today about foster care students and providing educational stability for those students. Please make sure that your computers and phones and your camera are turned off. If you have questions, type them in the chat box, please. All right, so foster care was reauthorized under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, and it requires the SCDE to describe the steps that it will take to collaborate with the Department of Social Services to ensure educational stability for children in foster care. The definition in South Carolina, at least, for a child in foster care is one for whom 24-hour substitute care is provided because the child has been placed away from his parents or guardians and is under the responsibility of the Child Welfare Agency. All right, here are a few facts that might help you to understand why educational stability is an issue and is so important. 15-year-old students who are in out-of-home care are half as likely to have graduated from high school 5 years later. Only half of those who age out of foster care have completed high school. Public school youth score 16 to 20 percentile points below their peers on standardized tests, and they read only at an average of a 7th grade level after completing 10th or 11th grade. So you can see why this is a big concern. And educational stability can make a difference. In a national study of 1,000 foster care alumni, youth who had 1 fewer placement changes per year were almost twice as likely to graduate from high school before leaving care. All right, under the law, when a child becomes enrolled or placed in foster care or has a new foster care placement, the child must remain in the school that the child is currently enrolled in at the time of placement. This is the school of origin, unless it is not in the child's best interest to do so. And the way that that is determined is the school that the child is currently attending, the school of origin, conducts a best interest determination meeting. At this meeting, Child Welfare Agency, foster parents, teachers, anybody with a vested interest in that child, including the student, if he or she is old enough, meet and determine whether it is in the best interest of the child to stay at the school of origin or to move to a new school. Now, it usually is in the child's best interest to move to a new school, but not always. And the new school is usually the zone school, but not always, because sometimes there are special programs at one school that the child is in or needs, or there could be the student's 2 months from graduating. So there are other circumstances. If during the best interest determination meeting it is determined the child's best interest is to go to the new school, then the child must be enrolled immediately in the new school. And what happens is the child welfare representative or the foster care takes the best interest determination form and an immediate enrollment form, which the Child Welfare Agency completes, to the new school. And the child has to be immediately enrolled. There's no excuse, no transcripts needed, nothing like that. The child is enrolled, and then it is determined whether how they're going to get the other information they need. All right, so here are some things that people think of when they're conducting these best interest determination factors. The child's preferences, the safety of the child, the appropriateness of current educational programs in the school, or whether the new school has more appropriate current educational programs, and which school will best serve the students' needs. One thing that is not considered during these meetings is cost. Cost is not a factor. A bid must take place at the previous school district before a foster care student can be enrolled in a new school. And schools do turn students away if they don't have a completed bid because it has not been determined yet whether that student then should best be placed in the new school or stay at the school of origin. So that bid must be conducted before the child can enroll. All right, so immediate enrollment forms are completed. The caseworkers or foster care parents take the child and the paperwork to the new school. Child cannot be denied enrollment because they don't have transcripts or whatnot. And the child should be attending classes and receiving appropriate academic services until they get even if the documentation is not complete. When we have issues, a lot of times involves transportation because cost cannot be considered a factor during the best interest determination meeting. Sometimes then we have to figure out how we're going to get the child from one school or one place to another, depending on how the bid worked out. So the law says that local education agencies and child welfare agencies will work together to agree upon the costs. If they can't agree, then we do have a dispute resolution process at the SCDE. I've done this 4 or 5 years now, and I've never had to use that, but it can be used if we can't come to a resolution. Usually we do before that happens. If there is a transportation dispute, then the child must remain in his or her school of origin until that is resolved. Now, sometimes there are additional costs in providing transportation. And so in order for that to happen, the local child welfare agency has to agree to reimburse the LEA for the cost of transportation, or the LEA has to agree to pay for the cost, or the local education and the local child welfare agency have to share the cost. And it could include other methods of transportation, school bus, but there are other vehicles too that we use in order to transport these kids. So there can be public transportation involved as well. Foster care and COVID. COVID has placed a few challenges on foster care. One of the biggest challenges we've had is with remote learning. A lot of foster care parents work and they don't want the child to be enrolled in remote learning. But the school has a policy regarding remote learning and face-to-face instruction because they are limited by space considerations, resource considerations. They're running 2 vehicles in order to get students educated. So they have to consider these things when enrolling a child. Now, they have developed a policy of how they plan to do that, whether the child should be in face-to-face or remote learning. And whatever that policy is, then that is also what the foster care child must follow. So we can't just say, oh, a child should be placed in remote learning because that's what the foster care parent wants, unfortunately. We have to follow whatever the policy is for every other child in that school. The second issue is the best interest determinations. In the past, those have been conducted face-to-face. But because of COVID, those sometimes are not feasible. And so we have included that meetings can be done remotely. And we have special form. We have 2 bid forms, one for face-to-face meeting and one for remote meetings. All right, so what is the SEA's responsibilities as far as foster care children are concerned? SEA monitors LEAs and coordinates with CWA for state guidelines. We establish uniform criteria around best interest determination and transportation procedures. We data share with state, and it says tribal CWAs, but it's all CWAs, tribal or otherwise. And we provide technical assistance and professional development opportunities for LEA. Child welfare agencies' responsibility are to serve as a liaison between schools, family, and other services. They notify the LEA when a foster care child enters into foster care or has a change of placement. They do not initiate the bid, but they do invite relevant parties that they think have a vested interest in that child to participate in the meeting. They complete the immediate enrollment form when it's been determined that the child should attend a new school, and they facilitate that enrollment in the new school. All right, so the LEA's responsibilities are to develop and coordinate transportation procedures and to collaborate with the local child welfare agency point of contacts in doing so, to initiate and facilitate the best interest determination process, to facilitate transfer of records when necessary, and to ensure that barriers are removed that prevent foster students from immediately enrolling in the district, and to facilitate the data sharing process with child welfare agencies. All right, now Sarah's going to talk to you about Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and foster care.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me, my voice is a little froggy. So yes, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, does reference children with disabilities in the foster care system. So many children who need special education help are never identified, while others who need remedial help but do not have disabilities are wrongly identified as needing special education. Both these issues are compounded when children in foster care are moving frequently. So some considerations to make with children with disabilities in foster care might be to make sure the child has a legally authorized special education decision maker, and that this individual pays attention to timelines for evaluations and IEP implementation. Whenever possible, make sure that the decision maker sticks with the child throughout any school transitions. You want the child to be comfortable and all their needs met, during that transition. So advocate for the child to remain in the same school whenever it is in the child's best interest, of course, and help expedite enrollment when a school change is necessary. Know what the documents that are required and what documents are not required for enrolling, and what the rules and deadlines are in the new school district. As a state agency for whom the child is in custody and not yet have a foster care parent, you may ask the old school if special education documents would be included in the transfer of records to the new school. So those that you would inform the new school district that the child is coming to. But for those social workers or during that bid process for the old school, it's paramount that the old school provide information about the special education, the IEP for the child. We want to link that transition for those comparable services so that there is a seamless transition for the child in their new school. And so the children with disabilities have specific rights under the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, and other federal laws, which require that children with disabilities receive special services to succeed in school. One of the state and local education agencies' most fundamental duties is a child find. That is to identify, locate, and evaluate eligible children and to ensure that they receive needed special education and related services. If a child is suspected of a disability, a parent, family member, social worker, or teacher can refer a child for special education. As a matter of fact, IDEA explicitly includes children in the custody of a child welfare agency have a child find duty. So evaluations would begin upon the parent or the legally authorized decision maker who would sign a consent for the evaluations to proceed. We know that early years of a child's life is essential for long-term effects on health and the language, communication, cognitive and social development of children. Children from the birth to 3 suspected of a disability would be referred to BabyNet here in South Carolina, and school-age children suspected of a disability would be referred to their school district. So unless the unless termination of parental rights have been issued by a judge, the parent has a right to be involved in their child's IEP or individual education program into their team meetings. IDEA defines a parent as a biological parent, an adoptive parent, a guardian, especially authorized to make educational decisions for the child, someone with whom the child lives with, who acts as the parent, or someone who is legally responsible for the child's welfare, or even an appointed surrogate parent. It is the IDEA parent to whom the school must send notice of meetings and proposals, who attends meetings and makes decisions about what is best for the child. So unless the court order includes specific limitations and the parent is absent, foster parents are authorized to act as the parent of the child and make education, health, and other decisions for the child. Once a parent under the definition of an IDEA is established and consent is given, then evaluations may begin. So those evaluations are individualized depending on the child's needs. The initial evaluation is to determine what needs the child may have, if any. Once this process has begun, a school district must complete a child special education evaluation within 60 calendar days of its receipt from an IDEA parent's written consent. If a child changes school districts before her or his initial evaluation has been completed, the new school district must still are compliant in that 60-day timeline, unless of course it is agreed upon with the parent and the school district that of course that the procedures are continuing in a proficient manner. With that said, the sending and receiving school district must make sure that the assessments of children who change school districts during the school year are coordinated as quickly as possible to ensure prompt completion of full evaluations. If a child with an IEP moves from one school district to another, either in or out of state within the same school year, the new district must provide a free, appropriate public education, what the acronym we often use is FAPE. The new school district must take reasonable steps to promptly obtain the child's records, including the IEP and supporting documents from the previous school district. The old district must take reasonable steps to respond to the request promptly, and that is specific in IDEA. The new school must provide services comparable to the IEP from the previous school until the new district formally adopts the old IEP or negotiates a new IEP with the parent. If the child is transferring from another state, the school district may decide to conduct a new evaluation before developing an IEP, but during that time, the child should continue to receive comparable services. Thank you. So transportation. Transportation to and from and around the school is a related service that must be provided to an IDEA eligible student if the child needs transportation to benefit from his or her special education program. Transportation must meet the child's specific needs. So if the child has a physical disability and needs a lift bus, that should be provided. Federal disability rules do not require the new school district to transport a child to the old school district unless that is the agreed upon special education placement. Transportation cannot be added to the IEP for the sole purpose of preserving school stability. Transportation for the child to attend his or her special education program may support the child remaining in the current school. That's something that the IEP team would need to decide. This is not to be confused with the McKinney-Vento Act. The McKinney-Vento Act is a entirely different law. It is determined that under that law, if it is the best interest that the student remains in his or her original school, the child is entitled to necessary transportation to the old school for that. Again, the foster care law and the McKinney-Vento are separate in this area. The state of South Carolina passed legislation that educational and school placement decisions must be made to ensure each child is placed in the least restricted educational program. We often call that LRE, and has access to all academic resources, the services, and enrichment activities available to all students. It is also South Carolina law that these certified court absences of the children will be counted as excused absences. And I have to say, I do not have the chat on my ribbon here. So if there's anything in the chat, Leslie or Eric, you may need to read that.
As of right now, there's nothing in the chat, but if you guys have questions, you can drop them in there now. And I'm sure Sarah and Maria would love to answer them for you guys. So there's just a comment about how the breakdown continues to be with DSS.
Sometimes, Phyllis, and perhaps with your district, but not always. Sometimes it's the district. We are working closely with DSS, in contact with them several times a week, if not on a daily basis, to try to help improve our collaboration, as well as with some other outside agencies.
And we are doing the same. We're working closely. Our Parent Information Center, our PTI, with IDEA, they are also working closely with DSS.
So there's a chat about alternatives to running a bus for transportation.
Well, in the past, we have said that it could be public bus, city bus, could be taxi, could be other forms of public transportation. Plus, there are some vendors in certain areas that also will provide transportation on a contractual basis to districts. We are working with DSS at this time to define what kind of background checks must be completed before a taxi or one of these other outside vendors can transport the student. But at this time, any of those others, taxi cab, at this time, that's still the allowable.
Okay. That seems to be everything, ladies.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending, and good luck with your foster care students. And if you need any help, please contact us.